This video is going to be for the Generac GP17500E. Most of what I'm telling you is going to pertain to the GP1500 as well. I've never owned or worked on one, but everything I read suggested that the components are the same. This video is for people that have a crank no start, but you can get it to start with ether or carb cleaner or gasoline being shot directly into the carburetor. You're going to start by making sure you've got good clean fuel. Most of your issues with generators lie in bad fuel. Fuel starts going bad 40 days after it's produced. So it's not a very long shelf life item. So if you've got fuel in here that's, been over summer, go ahead and drain that out and fill it up with new fuel. You're going to want to drain your whole system. So starting at the fuel issue, you've done that and you've cranked on it and it still won't start. Follow your line, your fuel line, and it's going to come up to a vacuum actuated fuel pump. These are very easy to rebuild if that's the case. They're also fairly inexpensive to just replace. We're going to test to make sure that this is functioning properly. You will very first test to make sure you're getting vacuum. You pull off this little green connector, pull the hose off, and with a clean finger, lay it over the nipple there and crank the engine, and you should feel a pulsating vacuum. If you feel that, then you've got good compression on this side of the engine. Check your fuel filter. Make sure you got a good fuel filter. Varnished gasoline will make these go bad 9 out of 10 times. Then, underneath your engine cover, there is your carburetor and your air filter and all that. And you'll have a line coming in right here to the top of your carburetor. Take it off, put it in a container suitable for gasoline, and crank on it for 5 to 10 seconds, and it should start spitting fuel out. It should kind of pulse out. It likely won't come out in a solid stream. It may not. If it does, it's okay, and if it doesn't, that's okay too. And having fuel come out of that tells you that your fuel pump is in good working condition. So, and like I said, those are very easy to rebuild, and if anybody has any questions on rebuilding those, post a comment and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So, now we're going to focus on the carburetor. Pull your air filter off, pull your air filter box off. Carburetor comes off really easy. There's this for your throttle control, and you can just use a little flat blade screwdriver and pop it off fairly easily. And your choke control. And you'll pull that out and you'll take it apart, and if you've got this far into the video and you're fairly handy, you should know how to rebuild these, or at the very least clean it or check to make sure that it's flowing properly. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and reinstall it now that you know that it's flowing fuel properly. Go ahead and try and start it. If it continues to have the issue of a crank no start, or it'll solely run on auxiliary fuel being put directly into the carburetor, we're gonna focus on the fuel shutoff solenoid. The fuel shutoff solenoid is located behind your startup control zone on the bottom of the bowl of your carburetor. It is right here, this brass solenoid looking kind of like a tube. You'll see on the back of it there is a white connector with a red and a black wire. There's no particular orientation that needs to be in. This solenoid solely relies on getting 12 volts on shutdown. What we want to start out with on that is make sure you've got a good ground. This is my ground wire for it. And unplug it, make sure that you're getting 12 volts when you let off of the starter. If you're not getting 12 volts, you need to Make sure you've got a good ground. Check continuity on the ground wire from your ground point to the connector. And then check continuity from the connector to the where the red wire connects to the control panel. Look inside the connector and at the back of your solenoid. Make sure there's no corrosion there. And if you're all good on that, you'll pull your control panel, or I mean your startup control panel, you'll pull that off, and your solenoid will come out of the bottom of the bowl. It's a 19 millimeter or a 3/4, whatever you have, one and the same. When you pull that out, it's going to evacuate all the fuel out of the bottom of the bowl. So be ready to catch that with a rag or a small container if you can get under there, or do it in a place where you're okay with fuel getting on the ground. Your next step is, once that's out, there's a needle on the end of it that's about a little bit less than 3/8 of an inch long. And you're going to grab that with your finger and make sure it moves freely. If it does not move freely, you're going to go ahead and pull that apart. The way I did it was I used a pair of vice grips with a rag, clamped onto the needle, and pulled it apart. And when I got it apart, there's a small cylinder that goes into the solenoid. And when you pull that apart, you'll likely see maybe some rust or some gum from the varnished gasoline. Pull that out and clean it very gently with some emery cloth and some carb cleaner or clean gasoline or ether, whatever you have. Just make sure that it's nice and clean and there's no particulates in there. Make sure not to get dirt or hay or whatever you have inside the unit. That'll gum it back up, and then you'll be back to step one on that. So once you've got that moving free and clear, you'll check to make sure that it functions, and you'll just plug the connector back in, set your ground, bump your starter, and you should see or feel the needle move a little bit. If it doesn't move and all your voltages are good, you've likely got a bad solenoid as well. So you'll have to pick up a new one of those. I don't know a part number, and I don't know where you can get one. Google is your friend on that. Then you'll go ahead and reinstall it, and you should be able to choke it, start it, let it warm up, and you should be good to go. Couple other issues that people have with these is they'll be low on oil. If it's low on oil, it's got a oil level sensor right here. Some units have two, a larger one like this and a smaller one in the vicinity, whether it's underneath the oil filter, next to it, on top of it. And there's two wires that feed the larger one, and one wire from the larger one will go to the smaller one. You're going to look for wire 85. It may be blue, it may be green. It just varies on the unit. One of the 85 wires runs to the smaller sensor. The one that does not run to the smaller sensor, you'll unplug that, try and start the machine, and if it starts, you're going to need a new sensor. If it does not start, then your issue still likely lies in your fuel shutoff solenoid. Now, if you can crank on it and it'll start, but it dies as soon as you let off the start switch, your issue is likely the start-stop solenoid, which is behind this panel. And it's just a couple of bolts. You pull them off, and then in the bottom left corner, there's going to be a solenoid kind of tucked way back into the back of this. And you'll test that with a multimeter and make sure that it's functioning properly. If you have a scenario where it starts and runs as long as you're holding the start switch and then you let go and it dies, 99% of the time that's going to be your issue. Now, you may have an issue where you've got a known good battery, and when you try and start it, nothing happens. There's a fuse right here on the back of the panel that goes bad with excessive cranking. It's one of these style. I believe it's just a 10 amp. You'll replace that and you should have cranking again. and then you can go through the rest of your diagnostics on it. That was my issue on this. I'm second-hand owner. I received it not running and got it running today. If you have any questions on it, oh, and if you've got a plugged air filter, like all small engines, if you've got a plugged air filter, it simply won't start. That's just the name of the game. Do your maintenance. If you've got any questions pertaining this unit or other small engines, I can potentially help you out. Just leave a comment at the bottom of this video and I will get back with you as soon as I can. So yeah, like I said, this is for the GP17500E, and it should pertain to the GP1500 as well. I hope I was able to help you out.